Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. If you visit Provincetown, probably the clearest visible sign that this place has some link to the world of art is the sheer number of art galleries. The 2025 Provincetown Art Guide lists 42 galleries and art venues. However, just off the top of my head, I can name at least 8 other Provincetown galleries that are not currently in the guide. And that's not counting all of the artists who open their studios to the public. So that is somewhere around 70 to 80 publicly accessible art galleries, art venues, artist studios, in a small town of no more than 3,000 year-round residents. In addition, the neighboring towns of Truro and Wellfleet add another couple dozen of art venues to this list, so it's a lot. But interestingly, the art galleries have not always been there. In the first half-century of the Provincetown Art Colony, this was mostly a place where people came to study and practice art, not so much sell art. So what changed? What led to the proliferation of art galleries in Provincetown? So to talk about this today, about the history of art galleries in Provincetown, I have with me Grace Hopkins. Hi, Grace.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome to the Art Colony.
Thank you.
So tell us, who is Grace Hopkins?
Well, I'm an artist. I'm a gallery director. I'm a daughter. I'm a mother. I guess not always in that particular order. I grew up here, was born here, born in Hyannis, and lived every summer of my life growing up here and every winter in Manhattan, as most of my parents' friends did as well. And then I moved here in 2012 full-time and started to direct galleries, Art Strand first, and then the Berta Walker Gallery.
Tell us about your art. I hadn't realized that you were also an artist.
Yes. So I am a photographer, but my work is all about painting. I don't paint. My father was a painter, and I definitely don't do that. But I grew up amongst all the abstract artists and abstract expressionists mainly. So what I do is I go out and I find marks in the world, and I take a very straight photograph and I print it without doing anything to it on usually canvas. And then I mount it like a painting, and people call them paintings because they look like painting. They're only about painting. They're really not about photography in any way. And that's my vision was completely influenced by my father and all of his friends. And my mother was a Klein scholar, so that definitely came into it. I would have been named Franz Hopkins had I been a boy, because my dad and Franz were best friends.
Franz Klein.
Yes.
Yeah. And tell us, who was your father?
My father is Bud Hopkins, who was a painter who came to the Cape actually at the request or order of Franz Klein, and met his first wife on the ferry to Provincetown. My mother was his second wife. He went on for a third. But he fell in love with Provincetown and with the light. We lived in Wellfleet. Originally, he lived in Truro with his first wife, and then we lived in Wellfleet. But he was definitely a Provincetowner.
And he had a role to play in the world of art galleries, and we'll be getting to that.
Yes.
Because I spent the last 2 days doing some reading and research into this topic, and the amount of information is vast. Oh my God, I found so much information about the history of art galleries in Provincetown, which just shows that they played a very important role, because there's so much information in the Smithsonian Archives of American Art about these galleries. I also found a lot of information in the Building Provincetown website by David Dunlap, where every single building the history is detailed.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of information. But what I did not see is galleries before World War II.
Yeah.
Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, I think it was more schools. I think it was more about studying, like you mentioned. The 3 H's, Henchy, Hoffman, and Hawthorne, each had their own school, and they were fighting a lot about whether it should be representational or abstraction, which led to that big giant show and fight at the PAM.
When they split from the moderns and the traditionalists.
Yeah. Originally, it was a place where you would come and vacation, but also really study art. And that's what drew Dad here, for sure.
And I think also back then, when it came to showing the art, it was more centered around the Provincetown Art Association and Museum.
Mhm.
That's where you were showing and where you were selling. There weren't necessarily private businesses or other entities that did that. And that came really after World War II. So if we talk about the world after World War II, what do we know?
Well, 1949 was a big kickoff. They had the Forum 49. Sorry, let's do that.
Well, Forum 24 was last
Forum
year.
24 was last
So
year. It was the
you're
75th
allowed to make a
anniversary.
mistake there. So Forum 24, I did it again.
Right?
Forum
49 was in 1949. A group of artists decided to make a summer-long discussion about all topics. And the base was at Gallery 200, which was 200 Commercial Street.
And that is now the Keel store.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a big exhibition at PAM, which was the first time that abstract art was really shown anywhere in the United States. So it was coming out party to some degree of the thought process behind the people. Like Pollock was interested in psychology, so there was a whole thing on psychoanalysis. I mean, everybody brought their own interest to the table. There was a wonderful talk on architecture, and many different topics were covered in the summer. But once a week on Thursday, they had these panel discussions, and it was talked about in the Times, and it was a big deal everywhere, and people came for it.
Yeah, the names of the people who came here is pretty impressive. You have all the big names of American art. You said Jackson Pollock already,
Yep.
Aline de Koning. Well, Hans Hofmann was already here most of the time.
Yep.
But after World War II, basically the whole perception of the world and everything that consists of the world had been shattered. You know, what is a government? What is art? What is history?
Right.
Everything has been turned upside down because of the war. And that led to this summer of reflection in Provincetown.
Yes.
And in one of the descriptions I read, they said that at Gallery 200, they had about 200 seats, but 700 people showed up on the first lecture, and they had to turn away 500 people.
Which is a lot for Provincetown.
It's a lot. And it's also interesting, you know, I know 200 Commercial now, the Keel store. It doesn't feel like you could sit 200 people in there.
Right.
They probably had a different setup back then.
And a lot of standing.
Yeah. And yes, it does also say in the historical sources I found that this was the very first exhibit of abstract expressionists in the U.S., which is incredible that it happened here.
And I think that's what got the interest of the New York galleries to take us seriously and come and open a shop.
Because at the beginning, a lot of these galleries were opened by New York gallerists who would come here for the summer, open a business. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so there were a few early galleries like the Sun Gallery and the HCE, which was after that, and forgotten the name of the one that was right before HCE in the same building.
The
Kuntz, which was a gallerist from New York. The HCE Gallery, which stood for Here Comes Everybody, was Dad's first job. He was probably 22, something like that, and he was the guy at the desk, which is kind of what I do now, which is kind of wild.
Oh, that's fun.
But it showed, you know, Pollock and de Kooning and Klein and everybody was represented, and they were also showing in New York, but this was a place where they could try out things that weren't necessarily the be all and end all of the money situation like it would be in New York. You know, it's not 100% needing to be a guaranteed sale in order to have the gallery exist. And I think that experimental quality has continued throughout in Provincetown.
So that started as the Coutts Gallery for 1 year, then it became the HCE Gallery.
Yeah.
That was at 481 Commercial. Now, if you look at that building now, 481 Commercial, it looks like nothing.
It does.
It looks like...
It had a big picture window, which they've taken out.
The whole front, if you look at photos, the whole front was big windows.
Big windows.
But somehow nowadays it looks like a converted garage.
Yes, it does.
But it's interesting that, you know, in my head looking at that building, I thought that was like something that was built very recently that didn't fit historical plans, but it turns out it is a historical building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Turca Carlos was another big player, I believe. And that continued after even Carlos died and her son died and everybody. She really kept it going for as long as she could and then donated a lot of her artwork to the museum, which I think was helpful for their collection.
Yeah.
But that brought in all the big players, Avery, and everybody was showing there.
Yeah, Turca Carlos, from what I read, she was a big, well, there was Teresa and Charles Cohen,
right?
who were known by the name Turca and Carlos.
Yeah.
And they had a great love for Milton Avery, so
Yes.
they showed his work every year, and he got a lot of business from them.
Yeah.
What I read also in my sources is that the very first thing to pop up after Forum 49 was Gallery 256
Mhm.
from 1953 to 1955, which was right next to Town Hall.
Yep.
And it's funny how these galleries always choose the street number as their name.
Right.
We still have that today. And it was a group, and it consisted of Will Barnett, Cameron Booth, Leo Manso, Louise Nevelson, who I never knew had a connection to Provincetown. It's so interesting that she spent time here, and Hale Woodruff. And it was a sort of a
co-op gallery.
A co-op. That's what I'm looking for.
It was the first co-op gallery. Yep.
And then from there, a lot of them went to, after this was dissolved, then came the Sun Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
The Sun Gallery from 1953 to 1959 under Dominic Falcone, better known as Val Falcone, and Yvonne Anderson. And then they gave over the gallery to Bill Burrell.
Bill Burrell, yeah.
Bill Burrell.
He's still going.
He's still around?
Yeah.
For 1960, 1961, and then to Nat Halper, 62 to 63. Mm-hmm. The Sun Gallery is now, well, the building is now utilities.
Yes.
The home supplies store. And one thing that's interesting is that before it became a gallery, it was owned by a Mr. Pilgrim, Mr. Earl Pilgrim, who was of Afro-Caribbean origin, and he was a jewelry maker. And he had come to Provincetown, first of all, to learn from Hans Hofmann. And in his jewelry shop, he would show works from Hans Hofmann's students. And I found a quote by the author Dorothy Gies-Seckler in a book about Provincetown painters, 1890s to 1970s. And she writes that was at the time completely unheard of for budding talents to be exhibited.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And the Sun Gallery had more of a focus on figurative work than abstraction, although Bill Burrell was pretty much figurative expressionism. That was his focus.
And it still is remembered as a legendary place because I felt it. I think it was a gallery that really was opened to experimentation.
Mm-hmm. And a great name, not having the number in it.
Yeah, true.
Just Sun.
And one thing I found on the internet that I thought was fantastic is the Sun Gallery Manifesto of 1955. I think more artists nowadays should still be writing manifestos. Everybody had manifestos back then. So let me read you Val Falcone's manifesto for the Sun Gallery in 1955. A man wants to be heard. A man can be heard at the Sun. There is tolerance here. The Sun will look and listen patiently, searching to find out things. Man needs sun. The Sun is open to all voices, always listening for the new sounds, lifting them from the darkness into the light. The Sun belongs to everyone who has something to say and a way of saying it, everyone who is looking for something.
I love it.
I think all galleries should have a manifesto like that. Wouldn't it be great? And then another gallery we mentioned was the Turca Carlos Gallery. That was at 353 Commercial, which is sort of across the street from the library at the very end of Center Street. Mm-hmm. And they were here longer than a lot of the other galleries who ended in the early 60s. They were here until, Turca Cohen, mm-hmm. who was sort of the heart and soul of the gallery, died in 1974.
Yep.
And then after that, her husband and her son took over, but it sort of fizzled away. And she had big names there like Milton Avery, Richard Diebenkorn, Louise Nevelson again, Arshil Gorky, Franz Klein, Grace Hardigan.
Yep.
Are you named after Grace Hardigan?
No. Although Grace Paley was an influence. She and my dad were friends.
Okay. But yeah, all these big galleries had sort of a New York Provincetown artery.
Yep.
And there was a movement between summer and winter between New York and Provincetown. But that sort of fizzled out in the 1950s. What happened there? 60s?
I think it's the 60s. Yeah, it was mid to later 60s. I'm not exactly sure what was the cause. I think maybe New York got more expensive or more focused. And I don't know. I mean, we tried to have 2 galleries for a while at the Berta Walker Gallery, and that was tough. You know,
I
it's
mean,
just
one here and one in New York?
we had one here and one in Wellfleet.
In
That
Wellfleet,
wasn't
okay.
that far away, but it was still tough to maintain 2 galleries, have 2 sets of exhibitions, have the work go back and forth. You know, it's a lot to have like a franchise, I guess. And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of places were just sort of saying, well, New York's it. We should just be in New York.
I guess so. There's a larger market there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the 60s were a turbulent time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
the Kennedy assassination, the MLK assassination, all these things affected the zeitgeist. And
Yeah.
maybe, artists were not so keen anymore to just spend the summer by the ocean. They were involved in society. They were politically involved.
Mhm.
And I was also wondering, you have all these artists we think of when we think of the 1960s. We think of, Ellsworth Kelly. We think of Agnes Martin,
Mhm.
Robert Indiana. We think of even Yoko Ono. None of these were linked to Provincetown. Somehow in the 60s, that generation just did not come here.
Yep.
So throughout the 60s, late 60s and 70s, you were telling me there was like no real art gallery here.
Yeah. Well, it had sort of fizzled into more of a tourism, like a pretty painting of Provincetown idea. And that was when Leo Manso, who had been doing the first co-op gallery, really wanted to have a strong co-op gallery in Provincetown. And so he got together with Tony Vevers, my dad, some other people, and they invited a group together. And the idea was they would have membership dues that you would pay every month. They would combine together to get a truck that came and brought work once a summer and brought it back at the end of the summer.
To New York?
To New York.
Okay.
Because everyone was living, except for maybe Tony and a couple of other people, everyone was pretty much in New York, which was unheard of at the time. And, I think that took some years to get going, but I always thought it was kind of a wild idea. But they didn't own the space together as a signed document. They just were a kind of laissez-faire agreement that they would either cover the cost of the gallery with sales and this poster they would do every year, or they would make up the fees that were necessary.
I'm going to get back to that poster.
Yep.
But when they formed the gallery, from what I see about descriptions of Provincetown in the 70s, it seems like everybody's talking about jewelry stores. Was it a big thing at that time? All of a sudden, all the galleries were replaced by a whole lot of jewelry stores. I'm also saying this because my neighbor in the Whalers Wharf is a jeweler. And he always waxes poetic about, the 80s. It was so great. We made so much money then.
Right.
Was that a thing?
I remember a lot of jewelry, fancy jewelry stores. Yeah.
That had sort of replaced the art galleries.
Yeah.
But so all these artists came together and they formed the
Long Point Gallery.
And where was it located?
So it was on the second floor of what was then the VHW. I forget how you call it, the Veterans of Foreign Wars building, where they would have events, and they would have they had a kitchen downstairs and an event space, meeting space, and they rented up the top floor to the Long Point Galleries, which was 2 giant rooms, a small room, and a little bathroom area. And it was there from 1977 to 1998.
So that is now where the Schoolhouse Gallery is.
So no, it's where WMR is.
So on top of, so the second floor of that building.
Yeah. So the bottom where Schoolhouse was and the kitchen is still there. That was the VFW room.
Okay. Tell us about all these artists who came together. Did they have something in common? Or had they known each other for decades? How did they all get together?
Some of them knew each other, some of them didn't. Different people brought different people to the gallery. I think it was interesting in that if you look at the artists, there is a very strong collage component behind them all in how they worked. Even Sidney Simon, who was a sculptor, had a collage element to his work. But I think that they admired each other's work and they suggested sort of ad hoc different people, and they ended up on this particular group, several of whom could have afforded the gallery on their own each year.
Robert Motherwell was part of this.
Well, yeah, but there were 3 that were very wealthy.
Okay.
And Motherwell was famous, but wasn't quite to the level of the money that a couple of them had. But yes, Dad invited Bob to be in the gallery, and everyone thought this was a crazy idea and he'd never say yes. And Bob thought about it and then decided to do it. And I think it was one of his favorite things because it took the edge off. It wasn't a big museum show in Europe, and it wasn't a gallery where he had to make sales. He could have fun. He could hang out with people, like-minded people. It was sort of like being in the fun part of a graduate program without having to do the work. You just had the dinner parties and the cocktail parties and the discussions, and that part was really wonderful about it. It was a lot of intellectual people that had, like I said, some of which had long time ties with each other and some didn't. Funny story was Dad also called up Berta Walker in 1976, and she was working at the Whitney full time. And he said, "Do you want to come run my gallery in Provincetown?" And she said, "Why would I want to run a gallery in Provincetown?" But I think that it sat there with her at one point, and it just kind of like laid in. And she ended up running a gallery in Provincetown for 36 years.
She's
Not at that
doing it.
time, but yes.
She's still doing it. So it was like a co-op gallery.
It was a co-op. It was sort of based like 256 and Leo Manso's gallery, where they had meetings in the summer every month or so. You would have a full-time, full-person show, one-person show once every 2 years. They had half members, 2 people that were not really there all the time. Ed Joby, I think, was a half member, and there was an assistant who was working for Bob Motherwell and Helen Frankthaler, and he was very young, and he was not living in in Provincetown at all. But they included him in it as a half member for a couple of years, and after him, I think Dad was the youngest. So they were all of a certain age.
Yeah, they were all over 60 when they started this. They all sort of were from the generation of the abstract expressionists.
Yes, very much so. And some of them were totally figurative anyway, a little bit of abstract, but there was a big range of the artwork. But they would do a certain amount of one-person shows. Each person would get a room of the 2 rooms. I think they did one show every 2 weeks, so several one-person shows in duos, and then they would have these topical shows, which were really fascinating, and they would have these giant fights over what the shows should be, and generally Dad would come up with a concept like the opposites show, where you would hang a person who you think is the opposite to you next to you, somebody outside the gallery, and people would pitch a fit, and then it would be a fascinating show. One year he said everyone has to bring in their artist wall and put it right next to their artwork. And he walked around, and I think of the gallery members, more than half of them had the same Piero della Francesca painting in a postcard. So there was all these kind of topical shows. They would do things on, they did a show for Arthur Berger when he was 80. They did a show for the Poet Laureate when he was 80. They did all these sort of discussion shows or tributes to, and that was kind of fascinating as well because it got them outside of their comfort zone and had them try different things. And I still have some of the Arthur Berger, they're works of Dad's, but they have music in them, which is fascinating.
Oh, interesting.
Because he was a composer. So there's a lot of ways that they kind of stretched themselves in a unique way that I hadn't seen since or before, for sure.
Now, when I think of a co-op gallery, I'm thinking, for example, of Gallery 411, which exists nowadays, where all the artists that are part of this collective also work in this gallery. Yep. They have to give specific hours. Was that also this type of model? No, they were not. At all. Okay.
None of them sat. They had a gallery director. They had somebody named Elizabeth. I've forgotten her last name first. And then Edith Hunter was there for many, many years. And then Mary Abel, and then Rosalind Pace, always a woman, always somebody pretty, which continued with Art Strand as well. The idea was to have a full-time person, and then they would hire part-time people to just fill in the hours. And their hours were always like 12 to 4 and 8 to 10 or something. So the idea was you could go to the beach or dinner in between.
Well, of course, that's very important in Provincetown. But you say they were on the second floor of that building.
Yes.
I've gone up and down those stairs a lot because there's a yoga studio up there
There's
now.
no wheelchair access.
And I was on the second floor of the Whalers Wharf with my gallery for the first 2 years, and it was impossible to get people to climb the stairs to
Yep.
come to the second floor. People are on the first floor, they're on Commercial Street, they're distracted by all the shiny things around them. They will not go up the stairs.
Yep.
So how did they get them to go up?
I think that everybody was a draw. I mean, everybody had friends here. First of all the people were alive for the beginning of the gallery. There was kind of a circuit, which was the group gallery, which we didn't discuss, but that was a big, giant cooperative gallery above the tennis courts in Provincetown.
That's all the way in the East End on
Yeah.
Bradford Street.
So that was the Loop, which is way east from what the Loop is now. But that would be, they would have tied openings so that somebody would go to one and then the other. They had parking, which was definitely a big part of it. And when Motherwell's wife got involved, she would have champagne and Pucci's chicken wings. Pucci's, which is now Finizzi's.
Okay.
She would get 200 chicken wings on a platter and have running champagne. So that was definitely a draw as well.
For the opening nights.
For the opening nights.
Well, we should bring back champagne and chicken
Right?
wings.
Chicken wings, if you think about it, is the very worst thing to have at a gallery opening. I can't think of anything. I loved the chicken wings because I loved Pucci's chicken wings, but I can't think of anything worse than trying to stand there and carry all of these things and get messy.
With greasy fingers.
Right?
Greasy, especially if you have like sculptures all around.
Exactly.
But I said I'd come back to the poster thing
Yes.
because when I was doing research for this episode, this kept popping up online.
Yeah.
Posters from Long Point Gallery,
Yes.
and they were selling for extremely
Huge
high
money.
amounts of money.
Yeah.
So tell us about these posters.
So the idea was to have a fundraiser once a year, and they made a screen print where they each brought in original pieces. Most of them were collages. Some of them were just a painting or a sketch. And then they would screen print them, and then they would have a party where they would come together and they would all sign them. And so part of it was that it was an original artwork and signed by all of the artists. There was one time where Barjan Bogosian decided to very expertly cut out with an X-Acto knife every single person's work except his own, which was a butterfly in the center, and hand it to the gallery director as a gift, which I wish I knew where it was because I think it's hysterical. But the idea was that everybody would participate equally in it, and then it would be worth more money. I think they probably went for a couple of $100, maybe $100, but now they're worth quite a lot of money.
And how many were printed every year?
I think they did different amounts. Sometimes it was 4 colors, sometimes it was 3 colors. Again, they would have giant fights over the colors.
Because I was also wondering that, because back then the printing technology was not the same as it is now.
Right.
So you had to choose
You had
your...
to pay by color.
You had to pay by color. And I was looking at these posters, and you could tell they had specific color palettes.
Yes. So they would have a meeting, and they would sit there, and Dad told me once that they had picked a gray and a black and a white, and they were all arguing over what the other color was going to be. And Sydney, who was mostly deaf and I think colorblind, Sydney Simon, was a sculptor, just kind of started rifling through all of the different things and picked out this peach color and slapped it down. And they were all like, okay, problem solved. But so I think that was part of the fun of it, was the camaraderie and the meetings and the arguments and, the dinner parties and all of that.
So were they releasing these posters like on one specific night in the year? People could all come and get their poster, or were they sold all through the summer? I
think they were sold through the summer. They may have had an event for them. They probably had one framed in the gallery office that had sort of smaller works. I was 4 when it started, or 3. So there's a lot I don't know about the goings on of it. But I did work there when I was 16 as a, night shift person.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know how they launched them because it didn't have the same kind of, social media, let's do an event kind of thing that we have now.
Yeah. Well, online just now, the first one I saw was $500, and I was thinking, oh, that's not too bad, $500. It was on eBay, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just sort of looked around, and most of them were going for $5,000, $6,000,
Yes.
$12,000. They were going for a lot of money.
A lot.
Because I guess you have the hand signatures of a lot of artists who are important in American art on it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then one year they made a portfolio, the clamshell portfolio, where they each made an 11 by 14 piece, and they donated them to different museums, the ones that weren't sold. And then they each got one. So I have one. And that's pretty wild because it's, original artworks from each artist. And one was given to the MoMA. So everybody's in the collection of
Oh,
the
that's
MoMA,
nice. I need to get in a collective
Right?
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you worked there.
That was my first gallery job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of pinch hitting at night. And I don't know if I ever sold much of anything, but I had lots of stories to tell about all the artists. May not be what anybody was expecting to hear when they walked in a gallery, but it was a really fun job, and I really loved being. That was my social scene. I was not the normal teenager with a lot of friends. I just would hang out with my parents and go to their parties. And my calendar when I came up for the summer was, these are the shows at the Provincetown Gallery, the group gallery, and this was at Long Point. And that was what I built my summer around socially.
Well, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So their goal in 1977, when they put this together, was to put Provincetown back on the map.
Yeah.
That Provincetown has sort of fallen to the edge of the art world. New York had sort of forgotten about Provincetown, and they wanted to bring the big names, bring the art, bring the prestige back to Provincetown. Do you think they achieved that?
I think so. I mean, I think definitely having Motherwell in the gallery was helpful to raise the echelon of it. I think a lot of them really wanted a place to show where they could show kind of what they wanted, and not have to worry about sales necessarily. I think it did lend Provincetown to be taken a little more seriously as a gallery scene. And maybe that was the combination of the two. And then later on, Rising Tide started underneath the Long Point, I think in the 90s.
So that was another gallery?
80s. Rising Tide was sort of the wives of,
Okay.
to some degree. Elsbeth Halverson was trying to get into the Long Point for a while and wasn't. So she had been part of that impetus to start the Rising Tide Gallery. And it was just downstairs, so where Gallery Ga used to be, in that space, not in where the schoolhouse is.
It's now rented by 20 Summers.
Right.
20 Summers has programming space there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was smaller than that. It wasn't all the way to the hallway, but that, and then it became a trifecta. So you'd have the group gallery and Rising Tide and Long Point.
Do you think that having Long Point Gallery and their names and their successes and their shows, did that encourage more galleries to open up in Provincetown? What was the scene after they started, like in the 80s and 90s? What was the after effect of bringing these people back to Provincetown?
Well, then you had people like Julie Heller and Berta Walker, who were pretty serious long-term gallerists who came in and started, their galleries as well. And I think having them all sort of around the Provincetown Art Association, which then became the museum also. So not just being the art association, and museum. I think that was really interesting to make the East End sort of this chunk of real art happening.
Yeah, the East End has become really sort of the gallery district. There's a whole lot of galleries there now. And has it always been like that, or were they more spread out before? You said there were some all the way to the tennis club before.
Yeah, the tennis club was the farthest away,
Okay.
but that's still pretty heavy East End. After Rising Tide, the DNA, and after the group gallery over the tennis clubs, the DNA gallery was up there and still is.
Which one is that?
It's it's Nick Lawrence's gallery now, but it had been a kind of co-op with Tabitha Vevers and Dan Rinaldi and Anna Poor. And there was a big group that was part of that, and that morphed then into the Art Strand, which was the first artist-owned gallery. So they actually had a corporation that they started together to pay the bills for the gallery. But it was kind of along the lines of the Long Point, where you would each get a show once a year or every other year. They would invite artists in to show for the summer, once a summer. And so it was, these were the children of, to some degree, the Long Point, but also, in Tabitha's case, definitely. But also it was sort of the next gen of that. And they had originally had a gallery over at the end of Schenk Painter. So that was really on the other side of where things are. But now it goes all the way up and down Provincetown on Commercial Street.
It's funny how you had these galleries that were sort of out of the beaten, off the
Mhm.
beaten track. Because
But
now,
they had parking.
but they had, I guess so.
It's kind of
Because even this was it this building we're in right
Yeah,
now?
where Ava was.
74 Painter. There
Yep.
was Gallery Ava was
Yep.
here at 74 Shank Painter, which is way off the beaten
Also
track.
has parking though.
But it has great parking.
Yeah.
But nowadays, even like me in the Whalers Wharf, just trying to get people to turn into the Whalers Wharf and walk those 30 feet,
Yes.
it's a challenge. People don't like to go off the beaten path. So somehow they made it work back then.
Yeah. Well, everybody's on their phone now is the other problem. So they're not looking up. But
Yeah.
I think that, you do a card at the beginning of every year, and sometimes you would do a card for every show, and we don't do mailings like that anymore. But you would physically have this thing in your house, on your fridge or whatever, telling you what all the dates were. And that was how we made everything happen. Anyone who had a party had a card or, so mail, I think, was a big part of it, which we don't have at all now. We have emails and we have, social media and that kind of
Yeah, I know, because my hometown was built on pulp and paper.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the digital era came, the pulp and paper industry collapsed.
Right.
Because nobody was using mail anymore.
Right.
But yeah, my family has felt that for real. But tell us about Berta Walker. So you work at Berta Walker Gallery. The gallery has been around for 36 years.
This is our 36th season.
36 years. So
and
tell us.
It was my 11th season with her. So she, has a lot of the Long Point artists in her gallery. She has a lot of other artists as well. Her tagline is the showing art history through the eyes of Provincetown. So she does much more of a kind of a museum sort of exhibition where she wants to teach you something. She wants you to learn about art history by looking at these artists. And so she does also show a lot of estates and artists that are obviously no longer with us. But it's really interesting to see how they relate, because a lot of the people that we show that are alive are students of and studied with these masters that we show alongside them, which is really great. And she comes from a long line of art dealers, and her family goes all the way back to the Walker Art Museum in Minnesota. And her father discovered Marston Hartley and, really had influence in his gallery in New York. And so she grew up with that. My dad was very close friends with her dad. And so she and I have a lot in common, although she's exactly my mother's age, which I love, but we grew up around the same people. We had the same kind of experiences. But she and I didn't know each other at all really until I started working there. And I had gone to her gallery for shows, but I didn't know her personally. And when the Long Point folded, she invited a lot of the artists in her gallery, except for about 4, and Dad was one of them. And I think size had a lot to do with it. And Dad at the time was making these very big, awkward wooden sculptures that nobody really liked all that much. So she didn't invite him in. But now he shows there, and, obviously the work is a lot smaller and older paintings and things like that because I have the estate. But it is interesting to see everybody together. And I have had Long Point shows at the gallery. Sometimes we have to borrow work from museums or local people, but it is kind of fun to see all these people that I really grew up with and were a big part of my childhood, that I get to work with their art.
Yeah, we sort of skipped over that part. So Long Point Gallery ended in 1998, right?
Yeah.
What was the reason why it folded?
So the VFW had decided they wanted to take the building over and use it the second floor also, or sell it. That was their decision. Even though they had 3 or 4 members that could have bought the building with pocket change, they happen to have, nobody thought to buy the building. And so they did look at a couple of other spaces, the Mooney building in Wellfleet, that's sort of at the end of where Mac's shack is. A couple of other places, but nobody really liked the feeling of going to Wellfleet. They really wanted Provincetown. And so they just let it go. And it really kind of hurt everybody mentally, physically, artistically. It was really a tough
Well, and then
thing.
Berta came in and saved them all.
Berta came in.
Well, one thing that's interesting about Berta Walker, when I was reading up on all these galleries, most of them were there 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. A lot of
Yeah.
them come and go really fast.
Yep.
If she's been there 36 years, what's the secret?
Well, buying the building was helpful, you know,
Yes, 'cause
not having to have
rents will
rent
end the
changes.
business.
Yep.
Yeah.
Having parking, I think she's had a really strong slate of artists, and she does things very professionally with a beautiful eye. She has just a spectacular vision. The way she puts together shows, watching her curate is just a sight to see. Because you never, I've learned over 11 years to start to see things the way she would, but I would never have gone in with that thought process. I learned a lot from her as to how you put together a show so you surprise people constantly. You don't let them sort of get wooed and just kind of complacent. You just kind of surprise them. But everything is done with a very professional museum style for her. And that, I think, comes from also working in museums and being a part of that genre. But she had a gallery in New York, several galleries. So she comes from a long line, like I said, of gallerists and knows how to sell work and show it, which are the two things that you do, you know.
So your gallery, is it open to new artists?
Not really. She limits the gallery to anyone that lives in Provincetown or has that kind of strong connection, like studied with somebody in Provincetown. But we show over 36 artists and estates, so we don't have any room.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
In the, but you know, things are always evolving, and she does invite people from time to time to try out the gallery for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But it is rare because it's a lot, and we do a lot for artists as well.
Yeah, because I'm sure a lot of people listening are artists,
Mm-hmm.
and I know a lot of artists are, they would love to have a show in Provincetown. And I see them and I meet them. They come to my gallery every summer with their portfolio and say, Can I show you what I have? And are you interested in new artists? Is that something you deal with over there?
We do, but it tends to be somebody, I mean, I would say 97% of the people don't even read the website and see that we only show Provincetown people. And they say, hi, I'm based in Georgia or whatever. And so that doesn't fit the criteria anyway, but there are artists here, obviously, that would be great to entertain if we could have room in our schedule, but it is hard. And we do long shows. Most people in Provincetown do a week or 2 weeks. We do 3 weeks, sometimes with a week, sometimes with 2 weeks in between to change the show, but always a week in between to change the show. So that's not a lot of shows per season. Really, it's only 4 shows.
Yeah, so I guess your first piece of advice to anybody who wants gallery representation is read the website.
Read the website.
So how would you evaluate, how would you comment nowadays on the Provincetown gallery scene?
Well, what was interesting was during the pandemic, we all freaked out and none of us knew if we were going to have a gallery or make any sales or what was going to happen. No more people coming in, no more art stroll, what were we going to do? And we all grouped together to start PAGA, Provincetown Art Gallery Association, which became a really strong group of gallerists who meet monthly and talk about what's going on and have group shows and come up with ways to support each other. And that's been something that Berta always wanted to do and never got done. Even just coming up with a schedule would be amazing, but nobody does that. Like when are the nights we're all having openings, that kind of thing. And it's different because everyone has different, timing and whatnot. When issues come up, like the parking thing this year, it's been interesting to see how we can try to band together and fight something as a group.
The parking thing this year is that in the East End, all of a sudden parking spaces are metered.
Yes.
So people who were used to go with their car to the gallery stroll in the East End of town now have to pay for parking, and it gets more complicated. So the Provincetown Art Gallery Association was trying to lobby with the town council to see if we could have an exception on Friday nights or something like that.
Yeah, it definitely hurt. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it hurt the East End galleries because a lot of times it was because it was free parking that they would park there and walk down, and then they'd come into the schoolhouse or they'd come into Rice Pollock when they wouldn't if they parked in town. So I think that was an oversight that was really hard on galleries, for sure.
Well, we'll see how that goes.
Yep.
I think we're doing this in late October, and I think yesterday we had a meeting,
Yep.
and I think the parking meeting is sometime in November. So we'll
Yes.
see how that
Yep.
goes. But yeah, we do have a lot of galleries now in Provincetown that are coming together and talking to each other, and that has sort of changed the scene in my feeling a
Yeah.
little bit. Before then, it was I felt like I didn't really know the other gallery
Yeah.
owners.
Me too.
I felt like I could go to the shows, see a few paintings, but I didn't really know who was curating it. I didn't know who was behind the scenes. And now we're better acquainted with one another.
We have flags that are all the same out there. I did do the poster as a fundraiser for PAGA. We had every gallery choose an artwork by one of their artists, and the artist came in and hand signed them all. So it was like the Long Point poster, which was really fun.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't a member at that point, I guess.
It was a fun party. Just
Yeah.
having the artist come in and walk around the room at the Commons and sign them all. It was great.
Well, that's fun. And a new thing, I don't know if it's a new thing, but something we have a lot of in Provincetown's art galleries now are artist-owned galleries. We can, name a good dozen of them nowadays, which, including my own, which I'm an artist, and I said, I'll start my own gallery and I'll show my own work. I show other people as well, but mostly on a pop-up basis, but it's my own work. Is that a new phenomenon, or is that something that's always been there?
I hadn't seen it until, it's been much more popular recently. But when I was growing up, I don't remember a lot of that, except maybe jewelerists having their own space.
Because even just in the Whalers Wharf, James Frederick,
Yep.
Eric Lesh, myself, Tom Johnson, there's 4 of us.
Yep.
We all have our own galleries. And there's Garrett Kotecki, who opened his own gallery, one-man gallery, and Greg Salvatore, but he's turned it more into a gallery that represents. It's not just his work there. And there was Adam Peck for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and now it's, I call him
Keith McClellan.
Keith McClellan.
With the Dozen Gallery.
Yeah.
And Karen Capato has her own gallery now, too. There's a bunch of them. So it's an interesting phenomenon in Provincetown.
Well, and I think that, people visiting galleries love to meet the artists. So I think that's a great thing that you have.
It's true. Yeah. But sometimes I don't always feel like chit-chatting.
Yeah.
But they always feel like
Right.
it.
Well, I think that's true in all galleries.
Yeah. So what's coming up for you?
Well, we kind of go smaller in the winter. We don't do a lot of shows. I was thinking about some programming that I might propose to do with a gallery called Artside Chats on Saturdays, and have one of our artists that lives locally come in for an hour and just be available to people. In that vein of people like to come in and meet the artist. In the wintertime, there's obviously a lot fewer people, but I think it could be really fun to have this time set aside and at least put up some work by the artist and have them be available if anyone has any questions or anything. Come and sit with Bob Henry for an hour. That's always fun.
Yeah. And if anybody is thinking, I really would like to open my own art gallery in Provincetown, what would you tell them?
Why not? It's a beautiful space. I mean, there's a reason why people come to Provincetown and Cape Cod and Lower Cape especially. And I've always been drawn to obviously the light and the beauty and everything, but the intellectual capability of who's here is so strong. And to have, an evening where you have to decide between like whether you want to go to hear Rachel Maddow or, some other amazing speaker, it's really wild. And everyone's got their books released and their, events happening. And I just think that the powerful minds that are here, and minds in terms of art and letters, but that's, I think, what makes the Cape really special. And that's what brings smart people here.
That's for sure. I mean, since I work my own gallery, I often feel I miss out a lot on all of these fantastic events happening all over town. And even when I was doing research for this episode, I kept on seeing ads for this show and that show and
Yeah.
that show. And I kept on thinking, I was here.
Right?
Why did I miss this? It's because every Friday there's 30 new shows opening. We have all these great events happening, but how can we find out if somebody's just coming to Provincetown? How can they find out what's going on in all these galleries all over town?
Well, there's the Paga newsletter that you can get, and it sends you a weekly update of every single event happening, what's on view, and what's opening in Provincetown.
So you can Google the Provincetown Art Gallery Association and subscribe to the newsletter.
Yes.
Yeah. Those art galleries in the 1950s that were showing all these artists that are now seminal names in American art, they also were attracting very important art collectors that were coming to Provincetown to see what they can get from them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was Mr. Hirshhorn.
Yes.
There's a whole museum at the Smithsonian nowadays called the Hirshhorn Museum. Can you tell us more about that?
So yeah, Joe was married to Lily Harmon, and so he summered for many summers up here and was very friendly with everyone. I remember Dad talking about him. But he would have gone to the Sun Gallery and the Provincetown Group Gallery, and maybe if they overlapped at Long Point, I don't know. But Dad, he definitely bought about 6 or 7 pieces of Dad's, and I was working on a class that I was going to give for Open University on the Provincetown Group Gallery, and I was noticing that every single person who showed there was also in the Hirshhorn collection. And so then I looked it up, like what was his actual connection, and I realized he was married to Lily Harmon, who lived down the street from Motherwell and Mailer, maybe next door. I can't remember. It was one of those buildings. And,
in the same area of the
in that
East
same
End.
area of the East End. But that was, I think, what brought Joe to town. And then he just would go shopping.
Oh, that's great that we have so many works that originated in Provincetown are now part of the National Hirshhorn Collection at the Smithsonian.
Yep.
Well, this has been a great conversation. And I have to say, before I invited you over, I hadn't really dug into the history of art galleries in Provincetown. And I learned so much. I learned more in this episode than in any other episode.
Really? That's great.
And, I have multiple degrees in history, so it's in me to do this digging and research, and I want to know more now. But this has been a fantastic little journey.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.